So today we have a very interesting session on digital marketing and the best practices for customer acquisition. So all entrepreneurs and startups would like to use this to get more customers and improve their sales. So in that sense, it's a very important session. And today we have Ved Narayan Vedantam, who is the SME and startup business head at Razorpay. Now, we entrepreneurs would like to learn from you how you succeeded in reaching out to so many SMEs and startups with your product so that we can apply in our own companies. And today we will have an hour of presentation and session from him, followed by Q&A in the last 30 minutes. So we'll exactly stop at 11:30. So over to you, Ved Narayan.
Hi everybody, good morning. How are you doing? I hope all of you are staying safe. All of you are doing well. Thank you so much. Very excited to be here. Very good morning to all. I know we've been through the entire country and Kerala in particular. I know we've been through a crazy last couple of years. I hope all of you are safe and sound. Your employees, colleagues, co-workers, your family members, everybody's safe and sound. Thank you so much for having me over here at Icon Kerala. My association with Tri Kerala goes back a while. I've been speaking to the startups here on a regular basis. Very excited to be here back once again towards the end of what's been a pretty interesting year, 2021. Today again, we're going to be talking about best practices for digital marketing. And while my laptop loads up, I just thought I'll spend a couple of seconds in giving you a quick context and introduction of what I do, what my background is, etc. So I take care of the startup and the SME practice at Razorpay. Like Sandit mentioned, I take care of both marketing and sales. That's one of the hats that I wear in life today. The second thing that I also do is I serve as an adjunct visiting faculty member in marketing at quite a few B schools in India. IIM Bangalore, Indore, Kashipur, University of Vermont in the United States. One of the positive side effects of the entire pandemic has been the breaking down of geographical boundaries. So, virtually I'm able to be a visiting faculty member in universities across the globe. The other hat that I also wear in life is I take care of, I serve as, so to speak, a mentor working with various startup acceleration programs, including Thai Kerala. Thai Kerala is one of them. Various other Thai chapters, Thai Chennai, various other Thai chapters across the length and breadth of the country. Head Start, which is again a very popular startup acceleration program. Atal Innovation Mission with the Government of India. Various Atal Innovation Mission, chapters, Atal Innovation Commission chapters, the Nexa Accelerator back in Malaysia. These are some of the things that I take care of. Very excited to be here once again. Let me just take a moment and share my screen. Hope everybody is able to see my screen.
It's coming, not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's come.
Awesome. So, like Sandit mentioned, the structure that we're going to follow today is we'll have the presentation running for close to an hour, after which we'll have Q&A for the last 20-30 minutes. So over the next hour or so, we're going to look at what are some of the interesting inflection points that have gone past us in the year 2020. What has been the impact of the pandemic itself on the startup ecosystem? We look at, and this is a consistent question that I'm often asked by a lot of entrepreneurs and startup founders that I interact with, as to how do I acquire customers, and more importantly, how do I prioritize my efforts? That's the key question people have, right? They understand what various aspects of digital mean and digital marketing mean, but where they really need help with is to know how do they prioritize. They know that they're not Amazon, they're not Flipkart, they don't have infinite resources, they don't have an infinite war chest of money which they can dip into whenever they want to. So they want to know how do they prioritize their efforts, and that is the key question in their minds. And so essentially it will be a presentation of two parts. We look at things from a customer acquisition lens, from a new customer acquisition lens. What are some of the things for you to look at? I know we look at a couple of case studies from some of my previous experiences in previous avatars. I used to take care of marketing for a company called Healthify Me before Razorpay, and we'll talk about what was, and which is today India's leading health and fitness mobile application with over 25 million users. I'll take you through, what were some of the things that worked for us back then from a mobile and a digital marketing perspective. And then we'll shift tracks and focus more on customer engagement. So from an engagement perspective, what are some of the best practices for us to follow? And here we look at an example from Simply Learn, which to me is one of the finest examples of engagement and nurturing, at least in the Indian context, if not the global one. And towards the end, we'll also look at a couple of bonus features on what is the need for repeat business. I'll take you through a failure story and a successful one. I do believe that we can learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. So I think we need to look at both. And then we look at what are the various ways and means by which you can build up digital brand exposure for your brand. How can you achieve that holy, much abused B word in marketing, which is virality? These will be some of the points for us to focus on. Starting off, some of the key inflection points. The first inflection point is, again, an interesting one, not the usual ones that you must have heard of and been bored with and tired of hearing, which is on India being amongst the world's largest digital economies, amongst the world's fastest growing digital economies. These are slightly hatke kind of inflection points. The first one is this. In the year 2020, and by extension in 2021 itself, particularly more so because of the pandemic, we've seen a huge acceleration towards embracing digital and the new digital post-pandemic world order. And in India, the word search and the term Google search are almost synonymous. And for the first time in the year 2020, and that's also happened for a second successive year in 2021, Google search via the browser web was not the number one numero uno logical entry point for Indians looking to discover www, the World Wide Web. It was actually Google search via the Play Store, which became the number one logical entry point, which is again pretty interesting. And it has some pretty fundamental implications for all of you digital entrepreneurs here in the room, because it means that if you're looking to build a digital business, especially if you are looking to build a B2C business, the mobile app needs to be front, middle, and center of your digital marketing brand playbook. And for all you digital marketers out there who are listening into this session, it means that mobile marketing needs to be the fulcrum of your digital marketing playbook. The second inflection point, again, which was something which took a lot of people by surprise, was this. Now, what you see in front of you are the various phases that a brand actually goes through as part of its life cycle journey, in a prospect psyche, and where, say, it moves from awareness to consideration to evaluation and action. Now, let's say Sandit is looking to purchase a particular brand and he's looking to consider a particular brand in a particular category. Awareness is first seeded about that particular brand. Then he moves that to a long list, and he begins to create an extra long list of consideration set of brands that he's willing to consider. Then a slightly shorter list of brands that he's willing to evaluate before the holy grail of action comes in, where Sandit picks out his wallet, picks out his card, and ends up paying for that product or service. Now, despite the exponential growth of digital and social media in the country over the last decade or so, it was this good old fashioned television set which was the number one numero uno brand awareness building vehicle in India till the year 2020. At scale. That changed in the year 2020 and 2021, when for the first time ever, all of these extremely popular digital platforms, which need no introduction, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, they became the number one brand awareness building channels, which is again pretty interesting and fundamental. Now, shifting tracks, and one of the things that I often mention is that the pandemic has had pretty fundamental implications to the entire business ecosystem and the startup ecosystem. And at Razorpay, given that we have a ringside perspective or a vantage seat to have a ringside perspective of what's happening across the startup and the business community in India, because we process the entire cycle of money movement for any business, right from the inward money movement cycle to the outward money movement cycle. The inward money movement cycle through our suite of payments products like a payment gateway, a payment link, a payment page, where a business is able to receive funds from their end customers, and the outward money movement cycle where the business is able to pay out funds to their raw material suppliers, vendor partners through Razorpay's suite of business banking solutions, which is the Razorpay X, umbrella, under which companies can process payroll, have a current account facility, working capital, etc., etc. Now, given all of this, we often think of Razorpay as an index fund that sits on top of the entire startup and the SME and the business community in India. And we've noticed some pretty interesting changes, and I think it's worthwhile for us to talk through some of these changes that we've observed. The first one is this. We've seen a huge growth of obviously e-commerce, but within e-commerce, a huge trend of something called as D2C, direct to consumer brands, which have really grown in the last couple of years, which has been a huge trend that we've noticed. And this again has been pretty interesting because, for example, just to give you a very interesting anecdote, we also have a very strong partnership going with Amazon, wherein we've offered to Amazon India sellers a suite of bespoke, customized payment solutions for Amazon sellers, right? Which is available, which they cannot find in the open market otherwise. So Razorpay, we've created a basket of customized solutions for Amazon sellers exclusively. Now, we've conducted a lot of webinars, workshops along with Amazon for their sellers to handhold them across the digitization journey, across the payments lifecycle journey, etc. And in one of the sessions, when I was actually speaking at in full flow, just like this one, I noticed a couple of very interesting trends. I was stopped midway because people said, I can't understand a word of what you're saying. Because I was talking in English, people only understood Hindi for the most part there. So local vernacular is becoming a huge play, and we are seeing a huge growth of SMEs and startups from tier 2, tier 3 and below. And the other interesting trend was a lot of these businessmen, which are again entrepreneurs just like yourself, while they are making good money by selling on the Amazon marketplace, they were not completely satisfied. They had aspirations to build their own brand. They wanted to go direct to consumer. They wanted to control the entire customer life cycle. Which again I thought was pretty interesting and aspirational, which again explains and speaks to the point that I was making earlier on the growth of D2C. The other points, other segments that we've seen huge growth of has obviously been EdTech, health tech, IT SaaS companies, gaming, which again is intuitive if you think about it, because people have been stuck at home because of the pandemic due to the lockdown situations, etc. And they need ways and means to upskill and reskill themselves, which explains the growth of EdTech. They need ways and means to discover healthier and fitter versions of themselves, which explains the growth of health tech. They need ways and means to entertain themselves, which explains the growth of gaming. And the other very interesting trend that we at Razorpay have observed in the last couple of years has been a very nuanced but an important shift in the mental makeup and the demographic profile of the average digital entrepreneur. The average digital entrepreneur of 2020, 2021 is not like Sachin and Vinny Bansal of 2014. They're not like Harshil Mathur and Shashank Kumar of 2014, who's for the founders of Razorpay, who understood back then the importance of digital and technology and the nuts and bolts and the nitty-gritties and the workings of the technology stack. The new age digital entrepreneur understands the importance of digital and tech, but they don't understand, nor do they care about the nuts and bolts and the nitty-gritties of the technology stack, which is powering the entire digital platform, which I think is very interesting. And which is why they want to focus on running their dhanda, running their business. They don't want to be bothered about technology, but they want to use technology, which is why we've seen a huge growth of what we at Razorpay and in general call as no-code products, #no-code products. For example, at Razorpay, we've launched a suite of solutions like a payment link, a payment page, a payment button, which doesn't require the hassle of integration. There is no tech hassle. So even if you're an entrepreneur, Sandip doesn't know anything about coding, anything about technology, he can start using these products and start receiving payments and build a digital brand presence. It's a 2-in-1 kind of a product, which has been very interesting, which has essentially made digital and digital payments, as a corollary, more accessible to the entire mass of India's digital, entrepreneur base, which I think is extremely interesting. We're seeing some huge monies processed through the digital ecosystem, which again is intuitive because of the pandemic itself observes as headwinds across both the inward money movement cycle, the pay inside and the pay outside, which I think has been extremely interesting. So very, encouraging signs as we look ahead to the future of India's digital ecosystem. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the pandemic has brought digital to the forefront like never before. And one of the things that I often mention is that it's been like we've been sitting inside of a time machine. And the kind of change that we might have observed over a 5-year horizon in the digital ecosystem in India has actually happened over the last year and a half. And it's actually happened at a very constrained time frame. So if you had been in a time machine and you had woken up 5 years hence, the kind of change that you would have seen in the absence of a pandemic is what we have seen in the last year and a half. And the need for having a digital brand presence is extremely strong now. And like I mentioned earlier, I serve as a mentor working with various startup acceleration programs. I consult for various early stage startups. And question that I'm often asked is, how do I prioritize? Veda, all of this is fine, but I don't have infinite resources. Tell me, how do I prioritize my efforts? I understand marketing works. It's a teamwork, right? It's a team sport like cricket or football, where all of these channels work in conjunction with one another. But if I had to prioritize one for my dhanda, for my business, for my category, how do I prioritize? For my customers, what do I prioritize? Should it be Facebook, SEM, SEO, LinkedIn? These are some of the popular names and jargons which you might have heard of. Now, I'm sure most of you here are aware of what Facebook and LinkedIn advertising means, but while some of you might be aware of what these terms SEM and SEO mean, some of you might not be. So let's spend 30 seconds and I'll give you a quick crash course on what these stand for. let's say Sandit is looking to plan a holiday in say Coorg, for example, right? Sandit searches for resorts in Coorg, yeah, and or let's say he's looking to go to Pollachi, for example, closer to Kerala, and he searches for resorts in Pollachi. Now, what happens is every time somebody enters something on Google search, a real-time virtual auction actually occurs. It's very similar to an auction in a real world. Let's say I'm looking to auction this OnePlus phone. It's very similar to that, where you have various advertisers, bidding various rates for purchasing that phone. In this case, you have various advertisers bidding for the right to serve their advertisement in the first spot for that particular keyword. Let's say booking.com in this example, hypothetically, has bid 100 rupees for that keyword, and Make My Trip has bid, say, 200 rupees. Now, for the most part, whoever bids the highest, there are other factors as well which determine whose ad comes up on top, but for the most part, it is determined by who has bid the highest. In this case, given that Make My Trip has bid the highest, Sandit would see a bunch of search results. The first few ones would have the term ad listed against them on the search results page. Now, Make My Trip would be on top. If Sandit were to click on the Make My Trip ad, Make My Trip would be charged 200 rupees by Google. This is called cost per click, CPC advertising. And all of the efforts that you as an entrepreneur, as a digital marketer, undertake to make sure that your brand's ads, search ads, come up on top for relevant keyword search queries is referred to as SEM, search engine marketing. Now, if you scroll a little further down, if Sandit were to look a little further down on the same search results page, you would see a bunch of listings which do not have the ad tag listed against them. Now, these are referred to as organic listings, and these have nothing to do with money. They are based purely on merit. They are based purely by the decision of Google's organic search ranking algorithm on which landing page, which website is the most relevant, has the freshest content, has the best user experience, loads really quickly, is optimized for mobile. Based on a set of considerations like these, Google ranks certain websites higher. And if Sandit were to click on any of these listings which do not have the ad tag listed against them, the brand is not charged any money. All of the efforts that you as an entrepreneur, as a digital marketer undertake to make sure that your website, your landing page has a better chance of bubbling up higher and higher in Google's organic search ranking algorithm is referred to as SEO, search engine optimization. Now, for running SEM ads, search engine marketing ads, Google provides a free platform called Google AdWords. Yeah. Now, having said this context, I just want to spend a couple more minutes to impress upon you the kind of impact content and SEO can make for your business. Quite often when I work with early stage startups, the question that I often get is, Veda, how much should I spend in marketing? Right. I want to give you a couple of examples of brands which became fairly popular brands despite spending virtually zero in marketing. They hardly spent anything. They only did SEO. They only focused on content. The first example I want to give you is a company called Thrillophilia. How many of you here have heard of Thrillophilia? You can raise your hands on Zoom. Anybody here who's heard of Thrillophilia? Used to be a fairly popular brand before COVID struck, and it operates in the travel space. And travel, as you can imagine, is an extremely, extremely hyper competitive space in India. And you have a lot of global multinational companies like Booking.com, the Ibibo Group, etc. You also have homegrown, local, deep-pocketed players like Cleartrip, Make My Trip, Oyo Rooms, etc. And against all of these folks who had like tons and tons of money, VC funds, global multinational companies, Thrillophilia was a bootstrap company which had not raised even $1 in VC funding, in external funding, and they used to beat everybody else when it came to SEO. Because what they did was they had a very strong flanking strategy, which is what I call it, right? So they knew that they had no chance, because they were a small player, to rank for extremely high demand keywords like, say, resorts in Kulu Manali, or say, flats in Delhi, for example. Keywords such as these, which are extremely high demand, impossible to rank for. So they focused on keywords which were long tail, which had low demand, but there was the ranking difficulty was average. It wasn't extremely difficult or impossible. And they managed to focus on resorts and experiences more than anything else in these places, offbeat locations, like say a Kuttikanam, it's a fairly popular offbeat location in Kerala, if I were to give an example, right? Which I've been there myself. It's a beautiful place. I don't know how it is right now. How it is right now was there a decade ago. So they focused and had a strategy like this, and they used to beat every single player when it came to SEO, because SEO is all they did. They had no money to spend on marketing. And that is one example. The second example I want to give you, which was a fantastic case study on SEO-led success, is Practo. I'm sure all of you here know Practo. It's India's leading doctors marketplace, and it gets approximately 25-30 million visits every month. 90% jaw dropping. 9 out of 10 visitors they get every month. Out of this 20, 90% of this 30 million is organic, is through SEO. They don't pay for that traffic. And that's because they have obviously had a first mover advantage, but they've done such a fantastic job of SEO. Just to give you an example, let's say Sandit is a very popular gynecologist, let's say in Tuticorin, for example, right? And I search for Dr. Sandit, let's say in Cochin, right? Dr. Sandit is a very popular gynecologist in Cochin. I search for Dr. Sandit in Cochin. He has his own practice, he has his own website, plus he's also listed on Practo. I think somebody is getting an echo. Yeah. So what will happen is that if I search for Dr. Sandit in Cochin, his listing on Practo will come up higher than his own website listing because they have done such a fantastic job of SEO. I'll end up booking a consultation with Sandit via Practo. He'll have to share his commissions with Practo. So I just want to give you both of these examples of SEO-led scalable businesses that have been built. And the other point that I wanted to make is that SEO is slow wins. You have to be patient. Even the best of the best SEO experts in the world, Neil Patel, for example, who's considered the #1 SEO guru worldwide, even he says that any SEO experiment takes a minimum of 6 months to start showing results. It's not like performance marketing. You can't see results, putting in money today, seeing results tomorrow or next week. Good, bad, ugly. It doesn't work that way. It's a slow grunt work. It requires a lot of patience. And like I mentioned, focus on those keywords which have average ranking difficulty, even if the keyword search volumes are not the highest, so that you can see some kind of success in 3-6 months. Otherwise, you'll end up getting demotivated if there is no success coming through in 6, 9, 12 months. Yeah. Now, having said this context, let's dive right in. From a customer acquisition perspective, how do you prioritize? Should I focus on Facebook, SEM, SEO? I know I need to do everything, but if I had to pick one, what is my P0? My #1 priority. How do I decide that? The first question you ask yourself, Sandit is an entrepreneur. He wants to know how does he prioritize. Sandit needs to start with this question, the #1 question, which is on, am I operating in a category which is mass or which is niche? Right now, there are 2 ways in which Sandit can answer this. First is his gut-based hypothesis. Sandit knows he sells t-shirts online, it's probably mass. He sells mental wellness classes online, he's probably niche. That is one, which is very subjective. That is one approach. The second is a more objective, data-backed approach to validate or challenge his original hypothesis, wherein Sandit opens up the Google AdWords platform, opens up the keyword planner there, and searches for the kind of keyword search volumes which are there for core keywords related to his category. Now he searches for t-shirts online, he searches for mental wellness classes online, core keywords like this for his target market, which is say India. Just for the purpose of this example. Now, it's not a perfect science, but if the average keyword search volume for core keywords related to your category, if they are in excess of 15 to 20,000 searches a month in a country which has the kind of internet population size that India has, you can consider the category that you operate in to be fairly mass. If it is less than that, you can assume it to be niche. Now, what do you do if you're mass? You make Google search your #1 priority. Why? Because it's common sense. Right? Because you need to be where your customers are. You're lucky enough to be operating in a category where there is already existing user behavior pattern, which is already manifesting on search. People are already searching for core keywords related to your category. All you need to do is to piggyback and ride that wave. Now, you may not be Amazon, you may not be Flipkart, you may not be able to create new user behavior patterns that manifest on search. But what you can very well do is you can piggyback and ride the wave on existing user behavior patterns that are already there on search. Right? So you make Google search a combination of SEO and SEM a priority. Now, what happens if you're not that lucky? Sandit is not that lucky, right? He's operating in a niche space. He doesn't directly jump into Facebook's arms. He asks himself an additional question. Am I operating in a category which is high on personal connect, which is high on the kind of visual element that I can inject into my marketing communication? If so, make Facebook your focus. Just to give you an example here, when I first joined Healthify Me, like I mentioned, is a freemium mobile application, India's leading mobile health and fitness mobile application. By freemium, what do I mean? Certain aspects are free, certain aspects are premium or paid for. The free aspects involves the world's largest database of Indian foods that are mapped to accurate calorie breakdowns. So say, Sandit has had just a bowl of authentic Kerala puttu for breakfast, right? He'll be able to track how many calories he's consumed, how many vitamins, carbs, proteins he's consumed, etc. on the app. The app will recognize that. He's gone for a 5-kilometer jog. He'll be able to log that. He'll know how many calories he's burnt. So it makes him a lot more mindful of his eating habits and his workout patterns. This is like a daily diary or a calorie counting service, which is available for free. The premium service involves creating a series of personalized health, fitness, and yoga plans as per Sandit's health goals. Now, now having said this context, when I first joined Healthify Me, I had a huge culture shock because for the first time in my life, it was not Google search which was the number one dhanda driver or the breadwinner, which was driving ROI, attributable ROI from a customer acquisition perspective. It was Facebook. In all of my previous experiences, Facebook had always been more of a brand channel. It had never really worked from a performance marketing ROI perspective. Now that was a huge eye opener for me. That was because Healthify Me as a brand had such a strong personal connect with its end customers. It was operating in that kind of a category. In the category that Healthify Me was operating in, it was enabling people to lose weight, enabling a 40-something middle-aged working professional like me, right, to lose that 7-8 kilograms of excess body weight, which they have got because of a sedentary lifestyle, a beer belly, maybe a hypertension, a lifestyle condition, etc. It is enabling a 30-something young mother who's put on a lot of post-pregnancy body fat to lose that body fat, discover her earlier confident self, enabling a 20-something young man to muzzle up and get a six-pack ab before Valentine's Day, for example. We used to get a lot of these requests. So it was as close to the personal identity of an individual as it can get. And of course, as a brand, all of the communication that we did was testimonial led, video testimonial led, where we had customers come forward and have authentic retellings of the kind of life transformations and the body transformations that they had seen by using the application. All of this works well on Facebook. Strong personal connect, high empathy, video led communication, check, check, check. All of this works really well on Facebook, which is why Facebook worked really well. So Facebook works really well in these kinds of highly involved categories, like proactive health tech, the space that a Healthify Me or a Cult Fit operate in, or fashion, the space that a Nykaa or a Myntra operate in. Not so much reactive health tech, the space that a Practo operates in. Yeah, this is more applicable from a B2C perspective. But of course, if you're operating in B2B, and you're lucky enough to be operating in a category where the key decision makers in your list of target companies are white collar professionals active on LinkedIn, you can make LinkedIn your focus. For example, at Healthify Me, a lot of people don't know this. We also had a very strong, thriving, active B2B business where we provided a suite of corporate wellness employee engagement solutions for a lot of B2B businesses. And in this case, again, we were essentially selling to CHROs and directors of HR and above, right, who are in charge of employee wellness, corporate engagement, and or we were selling to CXOs who had the ability to influence decisions, even because they were senior enough, even if they were not part of the HR function. And in this case, all of these people are active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn was the primary lead generation and brand awareness building source. Now, digital always does not have to be the answer. You could be operating in B2B and your decision makers may not even be very active on LinkedIn. For example, I know of a lot of edtech companies that are selling to schools. I'm sure there must be a lot of people here in the audience as well. Not a lot of school principals, unfortunately, are on LinkedIn in India, right? But of course, you could still use YouTube and Facebook, but it's not going to be very ROI focused because you're using a very mass platform for going after a very niche segment. So in this case, you might be better off not even using digital, right? You probably need a more high touch acquisition engagement model like events, or better still, a channel partnership where you bundle your service or product with another player who already has the network and the connects established with the school ecosystem, and you have a revenue share arrangement. Now, coming back to our original train of thought, now let's say you're not that lucky, right? You spoke about what happens if Sandit operates in a mass space, he operates in a niche space with high personal connect. But let's say he's not that lucky. He's operating in what I like to call a double whammy category. He's niche, and so there are not enough people searching for his core category keywords. And to make matters worse, he's operating in a category which is low on personal connect. What does he do? For example, at Razorpay, we have a very similar problem statement. Razorpay is a B2B payments company. We're not peer-to-peer. We're not like Google Pay. We're not like PhonePe. We're not like Paytm, right? And so not a lot of people are actually searching for core B2B payment-centric keywords. It's niche. Plus, let's face it, who's our target customer? People like you, right? The entrepreneur. The entrepreneur doesn't wake up in the morning and get excited about the fact that they want to start using a payment solution. That's just the nature of the category itself. I can't take it personally. It's not like health and fitness. So what do I do in this case? So I don't have enough people searching for me. And to make matters worse, I don't have a very strong personal connect. That's just the nature by definition of the category itself. What do I do in this case? And this is something that we do at Razorpay very consciously, is I focus on not just core dhanda relevant keywords which are relevant to the category in the business, like payment gateway, B2B payments, etc., which I need to do, but there are not enough of a keyword search volume there. I try to expand my brand awareness by going after a larger keyword pool universe, which is slightly miscellaneous to my business, but still extremely relevant to my end customer, which have much larger keyword search volumes. For example, we know that entrepreneurs have questions on three large spaces: digital literacy, financial literacy, and compliance. So we focus on creating content on keywords like how do I use digital marketing for growing my business? How do I use how do I read a PNL and a balance sheet? A lot of entrepreneurs don't know this, first time entrepreneurs. How do I navigate the GST compliance maze? A lot of people don't understand GST, right? So we try to address questions like these. All of these have much larger keyword search volumes. And what is the relevance for these keyword pools to Razorpay's business? Not so much. But what is the relevance for these keyword pools to my end customer, my prospect, which is the entrepreneur? A lot. And more importantly, these have much larger keyword search volumes than just core B2B payment keywords. So it gives Razorpay's brand an opportunity to get exposed to a much larger keyword universe and a customer universe. And it helps me bring them in as part of the funnel, and I can engage and nurture them over a period of time to convert them into paying customers. Yep. Now, just a quick snapshot into what were some of the things that we did at Healthify Me. Obviously, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, from a mobile marketing perspective, Facebook was the number one, ROI driver. But over some time, Google became a very close second, and it was a very interesting journey that we went through in actually making Google the number two. Google, 4-5 years ago launched something called as UAC campaigns, Universal App Campaigns, which became the only de facto way for you to run mobile app install campaigns for your brand, for your app, for your business. Now, when it was first launched, all advertisers hated UAC campaigns because you had to give up control, and advertisers, digital marketers hated giving up control. You essentially had to say, in Google Baba, we trust. Because you needed to give Google your Play Store listing, your iTunes listing, your creatives, and Google would decide whom to serve the ad to when. Google's machine learning AI-backed algorithms would decide. When we launched UAC campaigns to begin with at Healthify Me, the results were pretty poor. But what we did was we persisted with it, and we implemented something called as the Google Pixel, which is a piece of JavaScript code that gets executed or fired every time an event happens and sends information back into the Google ecosystem. Now that sounds complicated. Let me try to simplify and break that down with an example. Sandip, Sandip, I'm going to take your name again. I apologize. Let's say Sandip comes in and registers on the Healthify Me app. Sandip has just completed what I like to call an upstream event in his life cycle of engagement with the app. Right? He's just completed registration. Now, via the Google Pixel, I send this information back into the Google ecosystem, completely anonymized and aggregated, giving Google, I won't share any personally identifiable information of Sandip, his name, email ID, phone number, but I will share his digital demographic profile. What are his browsing patterns, demographic, geographic, attributes, etc., which essentially gives Google a sense of Sandip's digital Janam Kundali or digital footprint. Now, Sandip continues to engage with the app. He picks up a 7-day free trial, right, or a free diet consultation. He continues to consume content on the app. He's just completed some midstream life cycle events. I send this information back. Sandip eventually purchases a 6-month yoga plan, right, which is the most important downstream event, right, because he spent money with me. He's just moved to a paid customer from being a free user. I send this information back to Google, and I tell Google that, by the way, this is the most important event. I'm giving more weightage for this because he's actually spent money with me. He's paid me some money. Now, what I tell Google is, listen, Google, I love Sandip. I've just sent you information of one guy, one Sandip. Go find me 100 more digital clones of this guy. Now, Google's machine learning algorithms scrape the internet to find more clones of Sandip. Now, the algorithm's accuracy in finding more clones of Sandip would be limited to begin with when it has a small data set to play with. But what we did was we persisted with this over 3 successive quarters, and we continue to invest in Google Universal App Campaigns. And over 3 successive quarters, we were not sending Google information of one Sandip, but 1,000 Sandips. And we asked it to find the next 100,000. The accuracy improved of the algorithm, and which is how over 3 successive quarters, UAC became a very close second to Facebook. And that was how we scaled it. This is what I like to call inside out targeting. The traditional form of targeting is outside in, wherein you decide as an entrepreneur, as a marketer, who your end customer is, and you go after that. In this case, you're letting data and you're letting user behavior on your own app, your own platform, website, dictate who your ideal customer is. This information is fed back in real time to programmatic platforms like Google and Facebook, and they continuously keep optimizing to find more clones of your ideal persona. For example, at Healthify Me, when we first launched, we thought the millennial like everybody else, right? We thought the millennial was our ideal customer persona. Turns out it wasn't. But actually people were older than the millennial bracket, who are less fit, more prone to lifestyle conditions, had a greater ability to pay. That was a sweet spot. Yeah, at Healthify.me, we also did a really good job of ASO, App Store Optimization. You can think of it as SEO's cousin, but for the app ecosystem. All of the efforts that you want to take to make sure that your app's listing comes up on top for relevant search queries on the Google Play Store and on the Apple's iTunes Store is referred to as ASO, App Store Optimization. We did a really good job of this, which is the reason why even when marketing budgets were slashed, we never dropped in scale because we had done such a really good job of ASO. We did a lot of in-app marketing for qualified leads. So we used to have a lead scoring algorithm which scored leads basis their propensity to convert based on a variety of parameters. I know that an iPhone user converts better than Android. I know people coming from Mumbai convert better than people coming from Surat. I know that people having a lifestyle condition like a hypertension or a diabetes, they convert better than people who don't. Based on a variety of parameters like these, we created a blended lead score, which was a numeric score on a scale of 0 to 100, very similar to a class teacher giving marks to students in her classroom. So we created this lead score. So for the top lead score cohorts who had the greater probability of conversion, where I had a greater chance of monetizing those cohorts, we used to have some kind of in-app marketing interventions. Sandit, are you interested in the 7-day free trial? Sandit, are you interested in the free, no strings attached, 1-hour diet consultation with my top nutritionist? To essentially handhold, engage, and nurture leads through their life cycle of engagement with the app. We also did a lot of email marketing, more on that when we get to the Simply Learn case study. We also implemented something called AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages, which is a simple infrastructural code tweak you can make to your mobile website, your MWeb, to make sure your mobile website loads really quickly, which is very important from a mobile SEO perspective. Yeah. Moving on, just give me 1 second. I'll just plug in my charger.
Sure.
So the other thing, I know there must be a lot of B2B startups here, in the audience today, which is why I want to give you some, a quick pro tip on what were some of the things that worked for us from a B2B best practices perspective. Like I mentioned earlier, we did a lot of corporate wellness programs at Healthify.me. Most of the lead generation for this effort used to be from LinkedIn. And here, I want to give you a piece of advice which is actually contradictory to a lot of popular wisdom, slightly counterintuitive. But when you, especially, and this is on LinkedIn lead generation forms, we used to generate a lot of leads. I'll tell you the problem statement first and set some context. We used to generate a lot of leads from LinkedIn lead gen forms, targeting HR leaders. Now, let's say I've targeted Sandit, who say the CHRO of Ashok Leyland, for example. Now, he's a very busy man, and the way LinkedIn lead gen forms work is name, email ID, phone number, they get pre-filled and pulled from the LinkedIn profile. All Sandit has to do is click on submit. So Sandit is not very involved with the entire lead gen, in the entire lead filling process when he sees the lead gen form. So he's a busy man. He goes through what is popularly referred to in digital circles as fat finger syndrome. He's just clicked it without really being engaged, and he's clicked it very subconsciously. When my salesperson gets in touch with Sandit doesn't know what he's talking about. He's forgotten ever having filled that form. So the quality of the lead is very poor. Sandit is relevant from his demographic profile. He's a CHRO of a leading business house in India. So he's the right target customer for me, but there is no intent baked into Sandeep's lead generation process. So which is why what we did was we didn't just optimize for form fill or conversion or quantity, number of leads, we also optimized for quality and the level of intent that the lead has. So what we did was we artificially introduced some friction into the lead generation process, wherein I would force Sandit to fill out a free form field, which is mandatory, where in 50 words or more, Sandit, help me understand what are your expectations from the corporate wellness program at Ashok Leyland. So Sandit is forced to think. He has to exercise his neural synapses. He has to think about something and put in some words. So this reduces the forms conversion. This reduces the forms conversion by 30%, but increase the intent and the quality of the lead by 100%. So when my salesperson got in touch of the leads who eventually came through, the quality was much better. Their time was being used more productively. That's a quick thing for you to have in mind, especially if you're running a B2B business. Make sure you optimize not just for quantity or number of leads, but also for quality and intent. So far, we've been focused on customer acquisition. Now we're going to shift tracks and focus on engagement and nurturing. Now, from an engagement and nurturing perspective, it's about working with people who are already part of your marketing funnel, your pipeline, and how do you monetize them. Now, this is your marketing funnel where you've got leads at the top, Sorry, you've got traffic, app installs at the top, you've got leads in the middle, paying customers at the bottom. We call it a funnel because it gets narrower and narrower as you go further and further down, because people keep dropping off at various points. Now, how do you make sure your funnel is as fat as it can be? It's not very narrow. How do you keep monetizing people who are already part of your funnel? The first part of the presentation was focused on how do you increase the top of the funnel, get more people to come to you. Here we're going to focus on how do you make your funnel more efficient, more productive. Now we're going to talk about Simplilearn here, which, like I mentioned earlier, is one of the best examples in the Indian context, if not the global one, of engagement and nurturing. Now, Simplilearn is one of the world's leading, professional certification online training providers in data science, digital marketing, project management, iOS, Android programming, etc. Now, let's again understand this with a simple example. Let's say Sandit has signed up on Simplilearn and he wants to learn digital marketing, right? So on day 0, he would get a communication after he signed up saying, Sandit, congratulations. This is across email, SMS, WhatsApp, browser notifications. You've just taken the first step in picking up a digital marketing certification program. A few days after that, he gets a communication that says, here are some of the latest and greatest blogs in the space, which you might find relevant. A few days after that, he gets a communication that says, here are testimonials of people just like yourself who have seen career advancements after having taken this program. A few days after that, he gets an invitation to a webinar just like this one, which is being conducted by an industry expert for him to gain greater trust around the brand. If you notice, there is not one sales pitch across all of these communications. The brand is not trying to sell. It is just trying to add value to Sandit. Eventually, the brand moves in for the kill, the slam dunk, and comes in with a sales pitch, wherein they're offering a 20% discount code to Sandit, which expires in 48 hours, just to build a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, right? Now, this is what is referred to as a classic marketing drip campaign. It's called a drip because very similar to water dripping off a tap, one after another, these communications also go out one after another. Now, what the brand has successfully done here is they've tried to engage, nurture, and warm up Sandit before moving in for the sales pitch. Now, you as a marketer, as an entrepreneur, can orchestrate all of this and set up these rules and automate this, saying that on day 0, this mail needs to go out. On day 4, this template needs to go to Sandit. On day 7, this needs to go to Veda. You can set all these rules through something called as a marketing automation platform. Given before you hear some of the world's leading examples of marketing automation, HubSpot, of course, the world's leading platform, Acton, Marketo, very popular. Salesforce, world's leading CRM, also has a marketing automation module. The bad news, however, is that almost all of these are, prohibitively expensive if you're an early stage startup. Given before you here are more value for money options, Active Campaigns, and some Indian examples, Freshworks, Zoho, and WebEngage, which you can keep using till your list size is approximately 100,000. Once you scale beyond that, you might want to move to one of these more sophisticated feature-rich platforms. Now, you can use engagement and nurturing in multiple ways. The first one is as part of the transaction lifecycle itself, like in the Simplilearn example, to drive conversion, where Simplilearn was trying to convert Sandit into a paying customer. You can do that when you're playing, if I were to use a cricket analogy, when you have the luxury of time, when you're playing a test match. Because in Simplilearn's case, the sales lifecycle, which is the average time it takes for a lead to become a paying customer, is approximately 30 days. So Sandit, as the digital marketer there, knows that Sandit is not going to run away anywhere. I have 30 days to play with. I can engage and nurture Sandit. So I can use engagement and nurturing to drive conversion. It's a test match. I can slowly build up my innings. But if you're playing a T20 game, you're playing IPL, you're operating in a category where the sales life cycle is very short. Like, for example, online pizza delivery, for example. Let's say Sandit is looking to order pizza on Domino's. The sales life cycle there is 5 minutes. Sandit is hungry, he's in a hurry, he wants to order really quickly. So Domino's doesn't really have time to influence that transaction by engaging and nurturing Sandit. That transaction is gone, right? But what Domino's can do is they can engage and nurture Sandit. They know that Sandit loves fish, for example, right? So they keep sending him regular updates on the latest and greatest fish-topped pizzas that they have launched. So the next time Sandit is feeling lazy, he wants to order pizza home, Domino's is top of mind for him, right? So you can use in cases where it is a T20 cricket, right? It is IPL, where the sales life cycles are very small. The brand can still use engagement or nurturing to drive stickiness, brand loyalty, and repeat behavior. The other thing for which engagement or nurturing can be used for is for refunneling users and improving marketing ROI overall. For example, at Healthify, we had this entire concept of hibernating leads who are inactive users, who have the app, Healthify app, installed on their platform, but they've forgotten about it. And they've not launched it in the last 30 days. So for example, we used to have Instagram lives that were streamed live on the Healthify app. And on some trendy topics where you have a nutritionist coming and talking about advantages of a keto diet, advantages of a vegan diet, dangers of crash dieting, etc., which was a great way for me to reactivate a lot of these hibernating cohorts. So that's the third use case, wherein you want to refunnel users and put them back in, refunnel them, put them back into the marketing funnel so you can extract greater juice and monetize these users. Now, I understand that most of you here are business heads and CEOs. You understand dhande wali terms and business terms better than marketing jargon. I know you've been getting a lot of marketing jargon today. In business terms, if you had to understand why you need engagement or nurturing, I can give you two strong reasons. The first one is this: your sales team is going to be that much more productive. I don't know about you folks, but all of the CEOs that I worked with, they always love their sales team more than their marketing teams. They look at the sales team as the people who end up bringing in money, and the marketers, unfortunately, despite being a marketer myself, I need to admit to it, as the ones who end up spending their money. And through engagement and nurturing, you can make your sales team more productive. For example, let's say Sandit runs a company which has a 5-member telecalling team who can make 20 calls a day. They work for 20 days a month, which means they can get in touch with 2,000 prospects in a given month. But let's say, what happens if the sales team's pipeline is 10,000 strong? How does a sales team decide which are the top 2,000 to get in touch with out of the 10,000? That's where the power of technology, marketing automation comes in, wherein through a marketing automation platform, Sandit can set communications out to this entire pipeline of 10,000, see the kind of engagement that they exhibit to the comms. How many of them open emails, click emails, registered for a webinar, attend the webinar, visit the pricing page, and essentially create a blended lead score, like in the Healthify Me example that I gave you earlier. So now all the sales team now needs to do is to sort the 10,000 leads in descending order of lead score. Higher the lead score, greater the probability of conversion, and get in touch with only the top 2,000 who have the maximum chance of conversion. So their time is being used more productively, which means if the sales team is more productive, it means improved revenues and enhanced top line. The other byproduct here is that the sales team is not spam calling the remaining 8,000 who are not quite ready to make a purchase decision, thereby not eroding Sandit's brand equity. The second advantage, and I cannot stress this enough, of using a marketing automation platform is that they are by a factor of 10,000 and above more cost efficient for engagement and nurturing than CPC, CPM based, cost per click, cost per 1,000 impression based platforms like Google, Facebook, remarketing platforms, which means that for the same marketing spend, you get more customers. So your cost of customer acquisition comes down, and which means your bottom line starts looking healthier and better. So for two strong reasons, you should consider engagement nurturing, improved top line and improved bottom line. A quick pro tip when it comes to engagement and nurturing. This is a question that I'm often asked as to how long you should send these communications out. You've got to think of the entire sales life cycle as a relay race, with the marketers running with the baton for the first 3 quarters of the race before handing it off to the salesperson in the home stretch. And so approximately 3 quarters of the sales life cycle is how long you should send drip communications out. So in the Simplilearn case, I know that my sales life cycle is 30 days. So which is why we send it out for 20 days. It would have been stupid on my part to send Sandit, say, 5 emails in 2 days. You would have marked me as spam and unsubscribed. Or if I had gone to the other end of the spectrum and sent him 1 email every month, he would have probably gone with competition. So you need to have 5 to 7 touch points spread across 3 quarters. It's not a perfect science, but spread across 3 quarters of the sales life cycle. If you're Infosys, for example, which is a B2B business, sales life cycles are 12 months, a year, right? So in which case you're probably better off sending monthly newsletters over 6-7 months. Yeah. Now we're almost down to the end of the session. We'll talk about a couple of topics which are very close to my heart. The first one is on repeat business. I'm going to talk to you about a failure story first. I believed it back then. I believe it even more so now, that we learn a lot more from our failures than we do from our successes. This is an example of what was back then India's leading, almost a decade ago, India's leading online ethnic wear marketplace. It used to sell saris, lehengas, kurtis, kurtas, sherwanis. This was before Flipkart and Amazon launched its line of ethnic wear categories. And this was a healthy business. It primarily sold to NRIs and the Indian diaspora living abroad in Dubai, Toronto, England, Australia, etc. And the key USP there was it used to customize and stitch the products according to the body measurements and the requirements of the customer and ship it overseas. Obviously, if you're living in Toronto or Dubai, you don't have access to high quality, affordable Indian tailoring options. Unlike in India, where you have an Indian tailor in every street, right? And that was essentially the key USP that this brand was looking to address and speak to. Now, this was a brand that had very large selling prices, right? $600, $700, $800. strong margins, strong EBITDA, strong cash flows. But the problem was it had very low repeat behavior. So people would buy a $600, $700, $800 lehenga or a sherwani for an Onam or for an Eid or for a Diwali or a Navratri or a wedding, Christmas in the family, or a wedding in the family, etc., and disappear for 3-5 years, never to come back. So which is why when we tried to raise funds, this was a company that made real money, by the way, unlike a lot of e-com unicorns in the country. But when we went to raise funds, venture capitalists would not touch us with a barge pole because they said the business was inherently risky. We were completely and solely dependent on new customer acquisition only, because customers were coming in through one door, leaving through the other, never to come back. We had this leaky bucket syndrome. So there was no stickiness built into the platform. So we never really could turn this around. And while the company still continues to do well, it makes its own money, it continues to survive, it's never been able to achieve the kind of hockey stick growth that a lot of us aspire towards. Fast forward several years, I had a sense of deja vu when we had a very similar problem statement at Simplila. And here again, average selling prices are very high, 15,000-20,000 rupees, which is pretty high in the Indian context. If I've just convinced Sandip to spend 20,000 rupees of his hard-earned money in picking up a certification program, it's going to be a pretty difficult conversation for me to convince him to spend another 20,000 bucks in picking up another certification. And which is why, and this is again a company with strong gross margins, strong EBITDA, strong cash flows, but very low repeats. So what we did was we pivoted, but we managed to turn this around by pivoting the brand to the narrative of a learning path. Wherein what we said was, my relationship with Sandip is not just a transactional one. I'm not just a training partner for Sandip, but a learning path provider and a career planner. So Sandip, I've created this bespoke customized learning path for you. You're here at the base of this mountain. You've just picked one course. You want to get to this peak, which is the aspirational CMO role, Chief Marketing Officer role, if you're in the marketing track, or the Chief Data Scientist role, if you're in the data scientist track. And for getting there, you're at Basecamp A. You need to go to Basecamps B, C, D, and then to E, which is the apex, which is the peak, which again are 3-4 more courses. Essentially a bundled selling, if you think about it, but we pitched, packaged, and sold it as the concept of a learning path. And we targeted a lot of specific existing users through a lot of repeat drip communications. And over 3 successive quarters, from virtually zero contribution to month-on-month revenues from existing customers, we increased this to almost 15% of month-on-month revenues coming from existing customers only, without any new customers being acquired, completely ground up incremental revenues. Now, the last module for today, which is on the various kinds of digital brand exposure that you can actually create for your business. Now, there are 3 at the philosophical level, at the highest level possible. There are 3 ways in which you can create brand exposure. There's a lot of popularity and favoritism for options 1 and 2, not enough focus on option 3. It's also very difficult to achieve, but the most powerful. We look at each of these. The first one is, of course, owned media. Let's say Sandip Rai has a Facebook page. He has 100 followers. He makes a post, doesn't spend any money in promoting it. All 100 of them end up seeing it, which is called owned media. Exposure his brand has got to his own set of followers. This is, of course, hypothetical. All of us know that organic reach is never 100%. Mark Zuckerberg has gone on record saying, as you continue to grow, organic reach will tend to 0%. Which means that when Sandip has 100 followers, he makes a post, 80 of them might see it. When he has 1,000 followers, he makes a post, 600 of them might see it. When he has 100,000 followers, he makes a post, 20,000 might end up seeing it. You can get where I'm going with this. But for this example, let's assume that all 100 of them end up seeing it. And because as your follower base goes, that's Facebook's own way of nudging you to start spending money on the platform. Now, let's say that Sandip is in a hurry. He spends 10,000 bucks, and it's not a one-on-one correlation. I've just simplified it for the example. He gets exposure to 10,000 incremental eyeballs, which are not his own band of followers, which is referred to as paid media. He's got exposed to these people only because he's paid for it. Now, there is a third form of media exposure creation, which is even more powerful, which is called earned media. Let's say Sandip doesn't spend any money in promoting it, but the post that he made, his social media team made, was so awesome, was so kick-ass, that out of the 100 people who saw it, 50 of them ended up resharing it on their own feeds, and each of them had 100 followers each. So Sandip's brand has now got exposure to 50 multiplied by 100, 5,000 incremental eyeballs, which are not his own. It's not own media. It's not something he has paid for, but something that he has earned through the strength of his content. Social media shares are a great way for you to drive earned media exposure for your brand. There are other ways as well. For example, PR is a great way for you to drive earned media. Let's say Sandip gets covered in Malayalam Manorama, for example, in an interview. Now he's got exposed to Malayalam Manorama's readership, which is not his own. It's not own media. It's not something he has paid for. It's not an advertisement or an advertorial, pure editorial coverage, something that he has earned through the strength of his work as a brand. The other way is, of course, customer referrals, third-party discussion forums. Let's say there is a discussion thread on Quora where somebody is asking questions on how do I choose the best possible payment gateway for my business. right? Now, as a brand, as Razorpay, I have the opportunity to inject myself into the conversation. Let's say that thread has 10,000 views, that Quora thread. In a very seamless, non-salesy fashion, I should be able to add value to the conversation. If I can do that, I can create exposure which is earned. It's not owned. It's not something, the eyeballs there are not my own audiences. I'm not running Quora ads. It's not paid advertising. It's something that I have earned through the strength, timing, and the intelligence of my brand intervention. Twitter hashtag trending activity is again a great example of social media shares. For example, at Razorpay, we've done hashtag trending activities around hashtag unlock growth, where we try to crowdsource from the Twitter RT what are their mantras for unlocking growth in the post-pandemic world order. At Healthify Me, at the start of the year, hashtag New Year resolution. What are your health and fitness resolutions for the new year? And when we talk about Twitter hashtag trending activities, we're getting very close to that holy V word, virality, in marketing. And if you have to talk about virality, we've got to talk about what was one of possibly the earliest instances of something going viral in India, which was back in 2012, when social media was really taking off, which was the famous Kolaveri D song. A lot of us would know of the song, but not a lot of us would know of some of the inner room, backroom workings that went into making this song the viral phenomenon that it actually became. Yeah, take a look at this video, which gives you that sense.
How much money do you think is required to make a song world super hit? 10 million? 20 million? We spent zero. Close the mouth. I'll tell you how. First, we shot the making of the song and then added subtitles for all the non-Tamilians. Then the most important, we added the collar ringback tone code for making some pocket money. We then put up the video on our YouTube channel and then seeded it on social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter. To get the audience watching and talking about our song, we created a hook, hashtag why this Kolaveri D, which is a commonly used phrase in my state, Tamil Nadu, when somebody irritates you. Next 3 days, full tweeting different irritating situations with the hashtag why this Kolaveri D, but we also added the link to our song with it. So people who could relate to that irritating situation clicked on the link, watched the song and forgot their irritation. They also understood the usage of the question why this Kolaveri D, and then they started tweeting about things which frustrated them with the hashtag and also added the link to our song. Basically, people love venting their frustration on social media, and we use this insight to get hashtag Kolaveri trending on Twitter over 3 full days. Even people like Amitabh Bachchan ji and Anand Mahindra ji tweeted. The YouTube views kept on increasing. People were viewing, sharing. More than 41 million views across 220 countries. People love to ape a trend. So we put up a candid video of our own people singing the song in chorus, following which hundreds of people put in their own versions. Some even organized flash mobs, not just in India, even Netherlands and New Zealand. Oh, and by the way, the total collar ringback tones downloaded was 2 million and still counting. This brought us so much revenue that we are still counting actually. Okay, the enormous online buzz pushed even TV and print media to talk about the song. Articles were written on blogs, tabloids and even newspapers. It was featured in news channels and music channels. Every radio station in the country played Kolaveri. In simple words, earned media is estimated to be more than 67 million rupees only. Money spent, zero. Mission accomplished.
That's a very interesting video, and as we could play a quick game of truth or dare. There's one thing this person has said which is actually the truth, right? Which is the very interesting thing that they did, which is the hashtag why this Kolaveri D, which made their product relevant to the masses. But there's actually one thing this person has said which is not quite the truth, which is the fact that they spent zero, right? I know for a fact that they didn't spend any money, spent some money in promoting it, but it wasn't in regular forms of traditional marketing. It was in very non-standard forms of marketing, right? For example, like influencer marketing, very intelligent, subtle forms of marketing, and seeding it in specific communities. And and that's how for almost anything that goes viral, it needs that initial injection of paid marketing. for it to reach certain critical mass of awareness, after which paid marketing can be shut off and the crowd and earned media can take over, which is what happened here. And it became much larger than the paid media, initial paid media. It's like a rocket looking to escape from Earth's gravitational pull. It needs to reach that minimum escape velocity, after which it can fly free. That's all I had for you today. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'd love to take any questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much. There are a few things I had also great lessons on this. So I will come to my questions after. But before that, let me take a question from Sunil Gupta. He has asked whether you can give names of platforms for lead or email extraction tool from LinkedIn.
I'm sorry, what is his question? His question was on platforms from which you can extract leads from LinkedIn?
Yeah, yes.
So you can run LinkedIn lead generation forms directly, Mr. Sunil. One of the things that you can do is on LinkedIn, you can run something called as account-based marketing campaigns. Where let's say you have a target, you're operating in the B2B space, you have a target list of say 5,000 named accounts. You can create a campaign where you specifically target these accounts only. You don't have to spend money elsewhere. And you can, even within these accounts, you can specifically target employees who have a certain designation and above. Let's say you want to target only people who are directors of technology or engineering and above, who have this kind of a designation. You don't want to spend money elsewhere. And you can generate leads, from this audience. And LinkedIn allows you, once you create an advertiser account, you can download these leads from LinkedIn directly. I hope that helps. Wish you all the very best.
Okay. So you told about the drip campaign aspect. So I'm just connecting it to our own conference, that is TiECon. Where incidentally, I was also trying to support the marketing team. So what we try to do, for example, in such a conference, which maybe people start thinking about it a month or two max, right? So we try to do is in a week, we have a series of 5 emailers, like you like what you mentioned about Simply Learn. So is there a better way to do it in your view for such conference types? I'm just asking from a TiECon perspective.
Oh yeah, multiple things you can do. For example, if it's say a popular webinar that you're creating, one of the things that we used to conduct a lot of webinars, even at Simply Learn and TiECon, you can think of it as a hybrid model. I know there is also a physical event which is happening in Kerala, which I couldn't make, unfortunately. But I know one of the things that you can do is, have a regular series of engagement notifications that go out, that talk about the speaker, they talk about the topic, they talk about the number of attendees, so you can build greater interest and momentum. Once somebody registers, make sure that there is a regular series of communication going out to engage and nurture them. And the other thing is to also build a sense of FOMO. You send information out 24 hours prior, 30 minutes prior, 5 minutes prior, 5 minutes after it starts. So when you're very close to the event, email is not quite worth it. Right, you might be better off sending SMS notifications, WhatsApp notifications, etc. So that's something which you can do, which you can also use for events like these.
Okay. All right.
Which you can also amplify across social.
Yeah. So one aspect I had on that inside out targeting, which you mentioned. Now, for a very B2C model where you have a potentially larger number of people or customers, you might eventually reach the right customer. But imagine a scenario where your customers it's a niche, as you in your category, what you mentioned is niche. The one lead may take it in the wrong direction. Is it also an issue if you do purely an inside out target?
So this is at scale though, Sandit. So you're not actually making a decision manually basis 1 or 2 leads. You're letting data is being fed back in real time at scale to a lot of these programmatic platforms actually make the determination, because these platforms continuously keep optimizing and re-optimizing and learning and relearning because they have enough volumes of data being flowed back in. Like I mentioned, it works best only at scale. If you're just sending information of 1 Sandit, it will not work, but I need to send information of 100 Sandits back.
Okay. Yeah. So there is this other question from a startup. Like who obviously MSME or startup who obviously cannot afford a large ERP, the big ERPs, and they go with some ERPs like Odoo or one of those open source tools, which itself have some of these sales marketing tools. So are these sufficient, or you have to still go to that specialized tools what you mentioned for even for campaign and many other like CRM, etc., or these kind of light versions will work for a smaller firm perspective. Now, obviously, for large firms, things might be different.
Yeah, like I mentioned, from a marketing automation perspective, you can use tools like MoEngage. CleverTap again is a slightly more expensive platform, but a tool like a MoEngage, WebEngage, Freshmarketer from Freshworks, they work really well. Active Campaigns is a great tool. Once you scale beyond a certain critical mass, that's when you want to look at some of these more sophisticated solutions, which are also more expensive.
Okay. Okay. There is another question on what is your recommendation on getting a B2B contacts database?
Sorry, for getting a B2B contacts database?
Yeah.
I mean, there are multiple, third-party platform providers available from whom you can scrape a lot of this information. There is enough and more. There are web scrapers available as well from whom you can scrape this information of Just Dial and other places, etc. But I would recommend, if you're operating in the B2B space, I think this entire idea of cold emailing and cold outreach is now, I think, become redundant. I think that might have worked 10 years ago, but with so much of surfeit of information on digital and with people being consumed with so much of information overload across so many different platforms, I don't think cold outreach works anymore. Because email, for example, email, SMS, WhatsApp, a cold calling might still work, but not necessarily for B2B. It could work for selling credit cards, for example, in the B2C space, or selling home loans, but it doesn't work in the B2B space. I think in B2B, what you're better off doing is following the playbook that I had mentioned earlier, where if you're lucky enough to be operating in a category where you're selling to companies where the key decision makers are white collar professionals who are active on LinkedIn, make LinkedIn your focus. Have two parallel work streams there. Brand cover fire building, where you have a lot of high quality content being put out, which positions your brand as a trusted player. From a B2B space, that's a key divide that you're looking to bridge, right? The trust divide. You need to get your prospects to trust in you. They need to know that Sandit is somebody they can trust, because the downside is very high if the deal goes pear-shaped. If I'm buying just a OnePlus phone, if this goes bad, it just affects me. But if I'm making a procurement decision in my company, and if that goes bad, it affects my future in the company, it affects my job, right? So I need to be very careful. So the trust divide is the biggest thing that you've got to bridge. And the other thing is, of course, generating leads on LinkedIn. You can do that on LinkedIn, like how I mentioned earlier. That will be my suggestion and recommendation.
Okay. There is another question that is there a software for sales funnel? Is it effective? I'm sure you mentioned a lot of tools.
So there is the marketing automation platform, of course, which you can use. And in addition to that, there is also the CRM tool, which the salespeople use. And you can also have the marketing automation and the sales CRM tools integrated. So that when the salesperson is actually calling Sandit, I am the salesperson, I'm calling Sandit, who is my prospect, I have a clear sense of what is Sandit's Janam Kundali. What is the last series of marketing communications he's received? What is his social media profile? I have all of the information in front of me. I know if he has any open support tickets, all of that. So I'm going into the conversation with a lot of information upfront.
Okay. So there is another question from Abhi Telas. He asked, does the social media video needs to be out of the box to get attracted to a larger audience or viewership?
I mean, it depends. Like I mentioned earlier, earned media is the most difficult one, but it is also the one that is the most powerful. Because people coming in through earned media, they are not just seeing an advertisement and coming in. I have seen Sandit, who's my friend, he shared it on my feed, right? And I'm actually clicking on that and I'm coming through. So I trust Sandit more than I trust the brand. So instead of seeing a regular advertisement, I have done this because Sandit has shared this. No, it's not the brand. So this is probably the most powerful way for you to attract your prospects, and the funnels will also be a lot better. They will convert better. They will be more sticky. But the challenge, of course, is in creating these kinds of hotcake pieces of content, which is going to be that much more difficult. And so the short answer to your question is yes, especially on Facebook, video works best. Infographics work great. If you can provide data, if you're operating in the B2B space, and on LinkedIn, for example, infographics work great, wherein you can provide these kinds of bite-sized information. People's attention spans are limited. If you got to share a white paper on LinkedIn, people may not be interested. But if you can share an infographic, which is information presented in a graphical, bite-sized format, that's something that people would rate with better. That will be, my suggestion. I hope that helps. Wish you all the best.
And this, when you mentioned about video in Facebook, you necessarily have to put in the native format, right? And not share from YouTube link, right? I mean, that is what.
Yeah, you can put it in the native format. A lot of people also put in the YouTube links. That also works better, but native works better, I would say.
Because Facebook typically will push the ones put on native.
Yeah, they don't want people leaving the platform, of course.
Yeah, correct. So we have another question from Joseph. What is your opinion on influencer marketing? which platform is right for getting influences for influencer marketing?
I mean, influencer marketing is a very interesting space, and to me, you got to think of the way you should look at your marketing mixes. You got to think of forces and force amplifiers. Your force channels are those which drive regular dhanda, which are your regular breadwinners, right, and which are consistent, predictable ROI that they can drive, which are like a Rahul Dravid, so to speak. Your force amplifiers are like a Virendra Sehwags, right? They help your force channels perform better over time, and they themselves may not be able to drive ROI. Like influencer marketing is one such. So if you consistently keep investing in influencer marketing over time, you should start seeing, and you do it right, you can start seeing other channels do better. You can work with micro influencers, small influencers who have small follower base but very relatable, or you can work with macro influencers, large celebrities, right? Limited number of macro influencers depending on your objective and your category and your brand. And there are multiple agencies you can use for actually working with influencers, and platforms. There are multiple platforms available, but I wouldn't really recommend a lot of platforms. But I would actually recommend that you use a lot of agencies. And the other thing is to curate and handpick influencers on your own. For example, the India is also unfortunately has the distinction of being the world's number 2 ranked destination for influencer marketing fraud after Mexico. So you have a lot of these people who masquerade as influencers, so to speak, who have like inflated follower counts, etc. And because that's also something you can easily achieve, right? Most of social media accounts that you see of followers today are trumped up numbers which are fake, right? You can work with, there are enough and more shady agencies at place which essentially have bots which will come in and follow, which are not even real people, which will come and follow your profile, follow the influencer's profile to make their follower base appear bloated so they can masquerade as influencers. So you've got to be very careful with choosing the right kind of influencers. And while there are enough platforms available, for example, Indian influencer network.com, etc., multiple such networks are available, I wouldn't really recommend it, especially for an early stage startup. For an early stage startup, it's better if you handpick your influencers to know the right, the good from the bad from the ugly. For example, one of the early things that I look for is if the follower count is very high, but there is very limited engagement on the posts. The other thing is the number of likes in a post are very high, but there are no comments. I see like 500 likes, but like 0 comments, because that is very difficult to fake with a bot. So these are some of the things that I look for. And the other thing that I look for, especially if an early stage startup, is have the don't onboard them just for the sake of money. Otherwise, they end up becoming just mercenaries. You should have them invested in your brand. So, for example, at Healthy Family, when we onboarded influencers, I used to handpick and curate every single influencer, and wanted to ensure that they were sold on the brand's value prop. Give them 1 month of premium subscription for free, and get them to invest in the brand, immerse themselves in the brand, get sold on the brand's value proposition before actually getting them to start posting. And even when they posted it, we wanted it to be relatable. It wasn't sophisticated ad shoots that we did, essentially screenshots that they would share, which are like everyday slice of life aha moments on how the brand has made a difference in their life. That will be my approach to influencer marketing.
Okay. So we have one question from Mr. Benny Kuruthukulangara. He's asking, are there innovative practices for employee attraction, engagement, and retention? Your response.
Sorry, for employee engagement?
Employee engagement, employee attraction, and retention.
I think employer branding as a function has really gained a lot of traction of late. A lot of companies have employer branding as a separate function in itself, wherein you have somebody with a strong marketing background who just focuses on creating high quality content, amplifying this on social PR, which is just focused on positioning the brand as a top destination for top tech talent or top talent in general to come and work for. I think that's something which certainly works better, which is a combination of content, social events. For example, especially for technology, there is this role called tech evangelist, which has actually come about, right? Wherein the only role is for that person. Essentially, that person is a technology person who also understands marketing. So you get that person to go speak at various events, be the public face of the brand. Usually the CEO ends up doing it, but if the CEO is too busy, this person, the tech evangelist, starts playing that role, wherein the only role this person has is to appear at various events, talk about how employee friendly the company is and how it is working at the cutting edge of innovation. That is something for you to focus on. Or it can be very gimmicky as well. For example, if you look at some of the recent announcements from BharatPe, right, wherein they said that all the people who joined, they have a chance to win a BMW. We'll fly you to Dubai for the World T20, right? Just because they wanted to hire more and more tech folks to come and join. It could be that end of the spectrum, which is completely gimmicky, which again is employer branding. Or it
Okay.
could be something which is more aspirational, where you focus on cutting edge of innovation, technology, the opportunity to work and make a
Hmm.
difference on key problem statements affecting the country, affecting the world. That is the other end of the spectrum. But employer branding in general works, and it is now a dedicated focus for a lot of companies, given that there are like serious shortage of top talent in the country.
Hmm.
There are like so many jobs chasing too few people, right? Too many jobs chasing too few people. That challenge is coming through. And what works best here in terms of best practices is high quality content amplified on social and PR, community and events.
Okay. So there is one more question. One second. So Ajay George Varghese asked, what is the right approach to be taken for international digital marketing, especially in new markets?
I think international digital, again, you've got to adopt a similar approach to what I mentioned earlier. Let's say you're targeting Malaysia, for example, as an international market. Hypothetically, I mean, first check if there is enough keyword search volume in Malaysia. If there is enough core category keywords related to your category. If so, tap that first. Make sure that your brand is available there. The second thing is make sure that you provide your brand enough of a cover fire across other channels, which are more outbound, which provide, because you might be a completely unknown brand in Malaysia, right? So, which is a completely new market. So people need to trust your brand. So they may click through your ad, but they will not necessarily end up paying money with you because they don't know who you are. They don't know Sandit. He's a complete unknown entity. He's a popular brand in India, but he's unheard of in Malaysia. So, which is why you need to provide the brand what I like to call cover fire. Enough of a brand cover fire so that people can begin to trust the brand. While the leads can be generated through search, it needs to have that cover fire, which is through Facebook, social media advertising, and PR, which is a very important thing. If you're entering a new market, PR is extremely important. A lot of entrepreneurs don't focus enough here. That's how you build credibility. You need to be seen and covered in top publications there.
Okay, understood. Okay. So there is one more question from an attendee. Apart from Facebook ads and Google ads, is there any other platform for ads and lead generation or conversion?
Of course, there is YouTube, which is part of the Google ad spectrum. Within Google, you've got Search, Google Discovery Network, which is the Google Display Network, YouTube. There is Facebook. There are, of course, a bunch of advertising platforms, ad networks, where you can also run ads on. There is, of course, LinkedIn when it comes to B2B advertising. Even in the B2C side, for example, at Simply Learn, if you're selling to white collar professionals, we were selling courses to white collar professionals. We used to use LinkedIn even on the B2C side. That's also something that can work. It's a more expensive platform compared to Facebook and Google because it's a more niche qualified audience. But LinkedIn again is another great platform. Affiliate marketing, again, a very strong way for you to generate leads, wherein you work with a network of affiliates who get incentivized for every conversion that they drive.
Okay. There's one question like, if you are, and the person who purchases product from you, the one who pays you money, is a business, and then the end user of the product is somebody else. How do you focus your brand reach to the either of these, as in the buyer versus the actual user? How do you mix that?
So I think at Razorpay, we have the exact same problem. If you think about it, Razorpay is a B2B business. But if you look at the end user of our checkout, it's the individual consumer who's paying. Say Sandip has an e-commerce company, he's using the Razorpay payment gateway, but the end user is Sandeep's customers, right? Sandip's customers. So it is actually B2B2C in that sense.
Yeah.
Not directly B2C. So one of the things that we focus on is we don't consciously focus on end consumer marketing. We focus on, obviously, I want to be seen as a trusted player for Sandip. But one of the things that we do is we try to subtly position the brand as a trustworthy one. Even from an end consumer lens. If you look at it, one of the best examples of this is the entire Intel Inside. Right? Intel is actually not B2C at all. It's just B2B. It's just the processor, the chip that goes into the computer. Right? But Intel Inside, there is so much of end consumer branding that they have done that people actually look for that logo, Intel Inside logo, depending on whatever computer or laptop they purchase. So that's a great example of B2B2C branding, wherein I'm not really using the Intel processor, I'm just using the laptop. Intel is actually a B2B company, but they've done such a fantastic job of B2B2C branding or end consumer branding. And over time, there's also a domino effect that comes into play. That starts driving pull for your brand with B2C, because my customers for Dell, my customers are asking for the Intel Inside logo. So I need to have that. I need to work with Intel. And that's very similar in our case as well, because a lot of merchants come to us because their end customers are not paying. They don't see Razorpay on the checkout.
And this, when it comes to very niche but high value product, for example, in our case, it's a boats. So, how do you balance the platform to use for digital marketing? In the sense, is it LinkedIn versus Facebook? This
Are you
question,
B2C or B2B, Sandit?
B2B, mostly B2B.
So I'm assuming you sell to various boating, shipping companies,
Yeah,
etc.
shipping companies,
So in that case,
transport
it depends.
companies.
Like I mentioned, you can use the same construct that I mentioned earlier. The key decision makers in your list of target companies, are they active on LinkedIn?
Hmm.
If yes, it's quite easy for you to create a list of named accounts. So globally, you might have possibly, I'm guessing, I don't know, 5,000 shipping companies or 10,000 shipping companies. Create a list of these accounts, target specific decision makers in these companies, say procurement heads or supply chain heads in these companies. Right?
Hmm.
I don't know what the right designation is. You would know this better than me.
Yes, yeah.
Target these designations in these companies and then use LinkedIn really well. And here again, as I said, don't just use LinkedIn for generating leads, but also use it as a place for you to push the envelope on brand awareness. Your
Hmm.
brand needs to be seen as a recognizable, trustworthy player. Both,
Hmm.
use it for both.
Okay. So Mariam from Crink Private Limited, and I think she attended your session in Capital Cafe mentorings too, and said the sessions were fantastic, like the one today. And the question is, like, our parenting platform is comparatively used more by moms. Do you think it's better to target more on dads who are the decision maker? Is it true? I don't think so. Anyway, but yeah,
No, in this case, I think it is a mother for the most part, which is the key
yeah,
decision
that's
maker
what
in
even I
the.
thought. Yeah. So the targeting mother is
So
what?
we target the parent. So for example, I've mentored early stage, startups which operate in this K5 space. They try to provide gamified learning for kids age 7 to 10. So the kid is too small, so you're essentially marketing to parent. This again is an example where your end user is the kid, but you're actually marketing to the parent,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And because the kid is too small, and in this case, I mean, having women-centric ads always works better.
Okay.
When you're targeting the mother.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we are come to the end. So because we want to stop exactly at 11:30. So thank you, Vednara and Vedantam, for a fantastic session. And there are a lot of lessons for me too. And I hope by next year, Tycon, a lot of lessons I learned today, we will also try to implement and improve. Not to forget the lessons I've learned, which I will do implement in my own firm. And I'm sure all the entrepreneurs who have listened to you today would be very learned, enlightened, and will improve their own company's branding and marketing outreach to finally earn more sales and finally earn more money. That is finally the objective. And I'm very thankful once again for joining us. And we do hope in a future event of Tycon, you will come here physically and we'll meet in
Yeah,
person. Thank you very much. Have a
absolutely.
great day.
Look forward to that. Look forward to visiting Kerala really
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you so much for having me over here. Wish all of you good health, stay safe, and wish you all the very best and success in your business.